On This Week in Sales, we're going to be taking a look at all of the tech companies getting the funding because this market is absolutely booming right now. Chorus.ai doing conversational intelligence within Zoom meetings. If this is the end of the traveling salesman, and much, much more. My name is Will Barron. I'm the founder of salesman.org, and joining me, the peanut to my butter, Victor freaking Antonio, sales legend. Victor, how's it going?
Dude, you broke me within the first couple of minutes.
Love it.
The peanut to my butter. What the hell, Will?
That just came out. But I could do that every week from now on. Every single week, there's going to be the
I'm going to talk to your partner. I'm going to talk to your partner, dear Emily. He just called me the peanut to his butter. There's something wrong with this relationship.
We're getting too close, Victor. I think that's what
it is.
Yeah,
it is. I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. All is good. How you doing, Will?
I am very good. I don't know if we can see it on camera right now. I will lighten the mood slightly. I don't think I've got sweaty pit marks at the moment. Maybe a little bit.
A little bit.
It will be fully drenched in about 35 minutes from now. I've literally just put this shirt on. We're in the middle, Victor, of a heat wave. And as we discussed before we clicked record, it's not actually a heat wave at all. It's just the UK. We're just not used to this. We're not used to this weather, mate.
For us in the US here, he's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and he's whining about that. But again, to your point, you don't have air conditioning.
No air
Something we
conditioning.
take for granted.
And I've got because we're recording from home. For anyone who's listening to this on audio, I'm recording from home anyway, rather than the studio. I've got the window shut so the neighbors don't think I'm a complete idiot just shouting and screaming at you on webcam here today, Victor. So it's just going to get hotter and hotter and hotter as this show goes on. And with that, Victor, how about this transition? The sales technology market is getting hot right now. Let's jump into the first topic. This is from TechCrunch.com. Outplay gets $7.3 million in investment from Sequoia Capital India to help outbound sales teams scale their campaigns. New capital is going to go into tech development and hiring. Of course it is. That's what all these tech companies are pushing for at the moment. That's why they need the funding. And they had previously another $2 million in March. So they're rapidly growing, right? Now, why this was exciting to me, and I thought this is interesting, is this new feature that they're developing called Magic Outbound Chat. This is a web chat box that is launched when a prospective customer clicks on an email link. Salespeople are then notified. I assume it goes to their mobile phone. There must be an app or something like that, so they can reply in real time. They're then provided with context about the prospect. And Laxman, who I think is CEO of this organization, Outplay.com, told TechCrunch that most chat boxes are designed for inbound sales teams, and the Magic Outbound Chat has helped some of its teams grow sales pipeline by 300%. Victor, what do you think about this feature? I think that is an incredible feature, and I would implement that myself in a heartbeat.
Two things. First of all, it's Sequoia Capital, so nobody gets mad at us.
What did I say?
Number two, Sequoia or something. Sequoia Capital. Sequoia Capital. And by the way, I have a law. I'm making this up on the fly, by the way. I have a new law. That the law of magic, and anytime you include the word magic in any product feature you offer, it's not going to go well. For Mr. Laxman, I'm going to say, or Mrs. Laxman, whoever it is, I'm going to say, why would you put magic in front of that? It just cheapens the product, man. Can't you just put like something else? But anyway, kidding aside, I do love this. I like the feature. It's a totally different twist. How do you see them using it? What was the first thought that came to your mind?
So very literally verbatim, no other reason to use this other than this. Usually a salesperson reaches out and goes, hey, I'd love to do this and this. Here's some value. Here's an insight. If you want to continue this conversation, let's jump on a call. Here's a link to my calendar and you can book a call in there. Well, get rid of that whole step. Just allow the buyer to click a button and jump in, even if it's not with the same salesperson, but someone within the team, to immediately have either a text chat, or hopefully you can go from text chat and say, hey, we can jump on a quick call now, if you like. So you're pushing the buying process forward faster. You're reducing, time to close. I think that's how that's how I would use it, having not experimented with the product itself. That to me is an absolute no-brainer. And especially, and even more so, say like I'm selling to surgeons, they're busy. It's very difficult to book a time in their diary. Well, if they get an email and they can just click, and it just essentially does a text chat between me and them. Perhaps it just is an app on my phone, just pings me, even if it's 6 o'clock, as long as I'm not kind of in bed, or as long as I'm not in the middle of my tea or something. Maybe even like Skype, you could leave a status on there of, hey, I'm not at the desk right now, but I'll be back in 5 minutes. That allows salespeople to communicate with buyers on the buyer's time. as opposed to this back and forth booking process, which has been made slightly better by things like apps like Calendly and other booking apps. But if you can just get rid of that all step together and just start to build momentum faster and faster, rather than letting the buyer sit on the meeting for 3 days before you can get time in your diary to or both of your diaries may match up, I think that would be an incredible tool.
Yeah, the big phrase you mentioned is on the buyer's time.
Mhm.
And also, people are more likely to, pick up a chat and want to talk as opposed to an actual phone call. So
Yeah.
I see that as a big win for them. So I love the feature. Anyway, drop the magic though. It's cheesy. It smells of salesy, hypey stuff like, hey, only today, can you get your magic chatbot? Don't do that. Anyway, let's move over to our friends over at Chorus.ai. They just keep moving, man. These guys are like just sharks, not standing still. Chorus.ai launches conversational intelligence app with Zoom meetings. Do we see where this is going? The integration, again, the mergers, the acquisitions. Chorus.ai, I love the way a ZoomInfo company now, and conversational intelligence platform leader for high growth revenue teams, today announced the availability of the Chorus app for Zoom video communications. The new app brings Chorus conversational intelligence capabilities directly to the Zoom meeting. I put some highlights here. As an embedded experience accessible with Zoom meetings, and by the way, I want to tie this into my Gong experience that I've been kind of going through lately. The Chorus app for Zoom enables revenue teams to be more engaged on the calls, lead to stronger relationships, higher conversion rates. Some highlights here I put. One is live notes, live note taking. Sales teams can craft better action plans by finding their live in-meeting notes attached to the exact points in the conversation. I think that's interesting. Collaborate with other people. I want to hit on the collaboration just a bit. And the last one is for follow-ups, you can kind of just review the information of the content that was given. All that said, I think this is a fantastic move to put that actually into Zoom. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Will? Because I think it's a great idea.
There are other apps doing live transcription and stuff at the moment as well. There's a whole bunch of them. You can actually use rev.com to have an actual person like live transcribe as if you are selling to people who are hard of hearing, perhaps, or you're selling to a buying group and they're all different destinations. Perhaps they're not native English speakers. So there are multiple ways to go about this, whether it's automated, which Chorus.ai is, or if you want an actual person to do this. But it's clearly the future, right? I love the idea that you can have a conversation, it's time stamped, and then you can go back to something that the buyer agreed to at the top of the conversation when you do an if this, then that kind of micro close at the beginning of the conversation of, hey, if I can prove this, this, and this, will you sign up today? If I can show you this, this, and this, are you willing to get Barry on the next call? You can now, it's almost a little bit icky to do that sometimes, to do that at the beginning and then come back to it. It's almost like you've set the buyer up. But if you can say, hey, at the beginning of the conversation, and then you could perhaps scroll to the text and go, oh, you agreed to this. Is that cool if we carry on with this moving forward? I feel like you're setting less of a trap. Does that make sense? It seems less manipulative to go, hey, you said this, it was documented, as opposed to me going, oh, I knew you were going to answer this and I've set you up in that way.
Yeah, I guess I was looking at it from a different perspective. And by the way, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of apps like rev.com. I use, for example, otter.ai, which is integrated into Zoom where you can get the transcription. And so what I've been learning, here's my recent finding. For those of you who didn't listen to our last episode. So I'm working with a fintech company, or a financial company, and they're starting to use Gong. And they've given me for the first time access to Gong, and I can actually go through the actual conversation and actually deconstruct the conversations. By the way, I'm enjoying that, Will. Like taking a conversation, sequencing it out, seeing what they're doing right and wrong. And so this intelligence platform, I think, goes to the next level of just basic transcriptions. It tries to highlight, talk ratios, keywords, key phrases, so you can identify that. What I found I like about the tool, and again, it's something that can be easily copied by a lot of companies, is that when you hear something in a conversation, you can mark it, make a note, and then everybody can collaborate on that note. So for example, hey, Will, you used this sequence in the presentation. I think your language was a little off or your tone was a little harsh, right? Everybody who's on that collaborative chat can actually see that and maybe learn from that. And so that's kind of where I see it going. But I got to tell you though, Will, I am not over the moon yet with Gong yet. I'm not. I got to be honest.
There goes the sponsorship right there. Just sponsorship.
No, but I'm not.
Cash.
I'm willing,
the business.
No, I'm just being honest. No. I can't. We can't lie to our listeners and viewers. I mean, I'm not over the moon yet. But again, I'm only, I'll say, a week and a half into it. And I see by the way, is it a nice tool to have? Absolutely. Maybe there's another level that I've not seen yet that really allows you to dig through the keywords and find the right phrase, whatever it may be. But I can see where some of the basic studies have come from that Zoom has put out. Gong has put out, but I'm still not over the moon with the company. For somebody to be worth 7.45 billion, it must be that I'm just not smart enough to see something that they do. You know what I mean? There's something, because it isn't the app. I mean, right now it's not the app. I'll end there.
I think you're being, this isn't the right way of describing it. There's a better way of describing it. Almost disingenuous though to say, I don't know what, maybe there's another thing. You're such an expert in this space, Victor, that if you haven't seen the hype probably isn't there. And it is hype, right? When we talk about valuations, we're not necessarily talking about a company that is doing, so like my training company, your training company would be valued on turnover, right? Like 3 to 4 times of turnover would be the valuation of the organization. A 7 billion valuation for Gong is not based on turnover. It's based on hype, acquisition, chance of going public, right? So that valuation is totally iffy and not something that I would kind of hang my hat on. But if you haven't seen if you haven't seen, I guess what I'm coming back to here is something that we've talked about on the show multiple times, Victor, which I've been pushing and you've been trying to push back on, that this whole AI thing is it's not AI, it's machine learning. It's stuff that if you stick enough time at it, you could probably just do yourself. All it's doing is speeding up some basic tasks as opposed to being revolutionary.
Well, it's funny because I was going to include an article this week in This Week in Sales. By the way, go to thisweekinsales.com, leave us your feedback as always. But I was going to include an article in here about the disappointment they're having with Watson over at IBM and how they basically tapped out and said, they were tapping out and they're saying, okay, we don't have general AI, which is the ability to do all these wonderful things that everybody talks about. We have very specific AI. And that's what you're saying. It's very specific machine learning algorithms that'll solve one specific task. And by the way, so the reason I'm allowing some ventilation in my opinion of Gong is that I'm wondering if there's an additional service where they run some analytics or some machine learning algorithms on all the conversation. This company is just starting out. So right now they have maybe about, I'm going to guess 50 conversations with clients. And I'm wondering if there's another level. And I'm going to ask them about that. And so that's the only reason I'm reserving judgment. Am I not seeing something that is beyond just the basic GUI, the graphic user interface of how it's laid out, which is very nice. But again, I'm not over the moon on the actual product right now. But again, I'm open. If Gong is listening, I am open. My friend Amit over there, Chris Orlov, Devin, I'm open to being wrong. Show me something I'm not seeing. But as I work with this company, I'll keep giving you updates on this.
Sure. Gong are definitely listening because I've had tons of feedback from Gong and sales reps.
Oh, Gong is coming after me. Oh, yeah, Gong is coming after me. All right, Victor, I'm going to show you. And by the way, I'm open to being shown. So bring it on, Gong. Thisweekinsales.com. Let's do it.
Well, to go from what we focus on the show mainly, which is technology and tools, to focus on what we talk about regularly and what we train on, which is the human element of sales. I thought this was interesting. Sales Impact Academy has received a boost from Stage 2 Capital of over 4 million in investment. This comes from siliconangel.com. So Sales Impact Academy is a growing go-to-market learning platform. It's a training product that received a major boost forward today with the announcement that Stage 2 Capital will provide 3 million seed rounds and 1 million in debt financing to fund additional educational content. So the platform, if you don't read there's one bit in here that I don't need to read, so don't look at the screen yet, Victor. Don't look at it. I can see you looking at the screen. Ignore the screen. I've left in a bit of text that I was going to black out because I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So they've just received 4 million in funding. It's a training product. It looks great. There's tons of experts on there. There's like Mark Roberge from ex-HubSpot, a bunch of other people that you have at least heard of and well respected in the marketplace. And a quote from them. This is from someone at the company. Though this is Mark Roberge himself. He says, "We've been thinking a lot about the sales tech stack. It's evolved a ton in the last couple of decades, but nothing has really happened on the education side. And that's really the enormous gap that we've seen. It's almost like all these companies are reinventing the wheel of looking of looking in the upcoming year, having dozens of salespeople to hire and trying to put together a sales enablement program within their sales organizations to teach salespeople sales 101. So with that said, 4 million in funding, these legends within the space, within our industry, backing it, being involved. I don't know if Mark is an owner or kind of an employee or advisor, however that kind of lines up. 4 million in funding, Victor. How many customers do you think that they have?
Oh, 4 million funding. How would I do the number? 5,000 off the top of my head, I'm guessing.
So they have 160 customers currently. That was kind of a shock to me when I was reading.
What?
When I was reading about the.
I see it down there. 160 customers.
Now, don't get me wrong. It could be IBM with 5,000 salespeople as one of the 160 customers, right?
True. It could be that. Here's the interesting thing, and I left an article. Now I'm regretting leaving this article out, but it was talking about that. There's this overinvestment in enablement technology, and there's not any investment in actual sales training. And if you don't get the sales training right, no matter how much enablement technology you give them, it ain't going anywhere. And so I should have included that. But I'll add that. So I can see where he's going. I don't know if I agree with that. I get back to it. It's not so much the content, right? I think sales training content has exploded online. So I would have to disagree.
Yeah, but is it good though? Or is it just crap?
But it's subjective, and I want to stay out of the subjective realm for now. I'm saying that there's more providers out there of sales training programs, and I'm just trying to be objective here. Sales training programs. So maybe there used to be, let's say 100, now there's 10,000. Now there's 10,000, you might be right. 9,000 probably suck. I get that, right? But there's some good programs out there. But I get back to the 1-2 punch here. This is why I think we're missing it. One is, I'm with you. Sales training platforms are needed, better ones and evolving ones, and also figuring out like what you're doing with your Selling Made Simple, I think is brilliant because you're trying to simplify using frameworks to make it easy for the actual learner to absorb the content and retain it, right? But then the second part of that we don't often talk about because you can't quantify is the discipline and consistency that's required to be mandated by managers, so to speak, to make sure that these people are actually learning. Because I could put a sales training platform in front of you, but if the salesperson doesn't want to use it, then it doesn't matter. So I think there's that third component, which is how do we embed consistency, a discipline of consistency with great sales training platforms like yours, and then the actual tech stack. I think that's the trinity right there.
So let me ask you this, and this is somewhat of a loaded question because I know what you're going to say. I'm going to push you down a certain direction after this. How important is technical sales skills versus things like discipline, the ability to not rely on motivation, but to force discipline on yourself, to live a somewhat healthy life so that you've got the mental energy to crush it in sales? What is the balance between the two of technical sales skills versus just being able to show up every day?
Yeah, well, that gets back to the whole, the skill and will thing, right? The skill is, you technically understand what's going on. The will piece is you actually have the energy to want to do it and want to learn. So there's always that balance. I don't know what the balance is, the ratio is, but I would say that the will piece is much larger than the actual training part, the actual product training. So if I'm doing sales training, right? If I'm a company and I want to do some training on my product, too often, you've seen this, we focus on product training, but we don't focus on the will part, which is how do you keep going? And I've seen a few companies now integrate a more holistic approach to sales training. They'll talk about food, diet, exercise, meditation. I have one company that does an hour of meditation before they actually do the product training.
So totally agree. And shout out to Mark. I was on with a SVP of a tech company today who wants to get his team on our training platform, which you can find over at salesman.org, the Selling Made Simple Academy. I won't plug it too much here, but it kind of proves this point. The whole first week of our training, there's no sales training. It's all about becoming assertive, being able to set goals, being optimistic, becoming, even if you're even if you're introverted, being able to turn on a level of extrovertedness, not being a people pleaser. And my tiny amount of experience in this kind of space, right, shows that, and not even that, forget experience, and we've got tons of data on this. So thousands of people go through our sales code assessment now, so we know what makes, we know the personality traits that make up high performing salespeople. But even putting all that to one side, because you have to believe that we've done the right research and we've had enough people go through and that we've got statistical, we've had the statistics done to an appropriate level and all that kind of stuff. Put all that to one side. Most salespeople will have experienced being in an organization. Someone comes along who's never sold anything in their life. They're just enthusiastic, happy. It might be their first sales job. And they come in and smoke everyone. So that just proves the rule. If you've experienced that once, that proves this idea that all the other stuff that goes alongside sales, opposite the technical sales skills, can be just as important, if not more important. If you show up every day miserable, pessimistic, you're barely picking up the phone. It doesn't matter how good you are on the phone. It doesn't matter how good you are at sending emails, doing the marketing side of things, being a personal brand, all that kind of stuff. If you don't physically do the work, you're going to get outworked. You're going to get outproduced by someone who's going to do the work, right?
Yeah. Here's my visual for everything you just said. All the skills you talked about, the will piece is almost like the platform that you're running on, right? And then the apps that you put on top are the actual, hey, here's how you do prospecting. Here's the prospecting app. Here's the closing app. These are all these apps. But if the platform, the operating system is what you're saying, the basics aren't there, then it's not going anywhere. And by the way, big shout out to Mark Roberts. I love his book, Sales Acceleration. Fantastic book. Highly recommend it to anybody. I specifically I like to be specific when I recommend the book. I like when he tried to understand the characteristics of what makes a great salesperson, how they began to track that when he was building HubSpot. So I really love his book, man.
For sure. And the reason just to circle back to this article, which you can find over at siliconangle.com, which you can also find at thisweekinsales.com, where we'll have all of the content, all of the show notes that we talk about in this episode of the show. What I thought was interesting was we see all these tech companies get funded. I think it's interesting to see. Last week, there was a sales blog, got some seed funding, 300 grand.
Yes.
Now this organization, an actual sales training organization with different courses, products, and like more formal in-person training as well that's offered. They've got a quite good setup and system there. 4 million in funding. Is this the next wave of funding that's going to come, Victor?
Will,
on the back of...
our time is coming, Will. Our time is coming for major funding. And by the way, it's an interesting shift, right? Because also all of a sudden in this knowledge industry, maybe that's being valued more. But again, I think to your point, when you said, there's a lot of crap content being put out there, you're absolutely right. It's the ability to find the right content being curated out there for exceptional or excellence. That's going to be the challenge.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next topic. And this is in our sales trading news segment here. Can sales assessments help address high sales turnover? So I want to address this topic with you, Victor, from Forbes.com, which you can find over at This Week in Sales, on sales assessments. But there's also a ton of good data points in here that I thought would be interesting to run through as well. So this is quoting from the article itself, which you can find over at Forbes.com. Would it surprise you, Victor, would it surprise you to learn that the average turnover rate for salespeople is 34%, and that nearly 2/3 of that churn is a result of involuntary turnover? Would that surprise you?
It does not surprise me because I was on this topic last week. I was reading some blog, and that's why I kind of know. So it wasn't this one, but at that time I was surprised. So yeah, it is. It was kind of shocking to see these numbers because that's. By the way, maybe you'll have it. Oh, you do have it here, so I'll let you keep reading because there's some good data here. You're right.
Okay, so I'll do this. What's the word? I'll do this to the audience as opposed to yourself, if you know this. Audience, people listening from all genders, all places, all
people
locations.
Of the world,
people of the world,
of the sales world.
Does it surprise you to find out that in a 2015-16 study from a professor at DePaul University, I've never heard of it, found
by the way, Chicago. Wait a minute. Hold on. Let's pause here. That's my hometown there, Chicago. DePaul. Of course, everybody knows DePaul University.
Have I told you that Chicago's my American kind of second hometown? Have I told you about my long lost uncle?
No, you've never told me the story.
So I won't go too deep in it. We'll talk about it off air. Turns out, like maybe 10 years ago, my mum passed away from cancer about 5 years ago. So 5 years before that, we just get an email from some random dude called Jerry in Chicago. He lives in Peoria, but then he worked and lived and grew up in Chicago, went to university in Chicago. That he's a long lost brother to my mum. As my mum was only child, she thought she was an only child her whole life, and then Jerry comes along. So we'll talk about it off air because it's an amazing story. It was put up for adoption, all kinds of weird Irish nun politics and all kinds of shenanigans going on. So we go over to Chicago somewhat regularly to visit my uncle Jerry and his family, and everyone go over there. So shout out to them. They will never listen to this episode, but shout out to them. So from DePaul University, which I now know is in Chicago, found that the average cost to replace a salesperson is $97,000. Now this,
by the way, that was the number I was going to ask you about because I didn't know what the actual number was. So $97,000 to replace a salesperson. I think it's higher than that, but go ahead.
So that number is broken down into $29,000 acquisition costs. So I assume this is recruiting and all that kind of thing. The average training cost is typically around $36,000. I'd be interested to know how they calculate that, because that's clearly time of trainers, product specialists invested into that individual. And that comes to a total of $65,000. So there's a bit of a shortfall. So what makes up the rest? So the rest is made up from lost opportunity on the territory while someone leaves, and your sales manager's got to fill that position. Typically, a sales manager will try and help out in the territory or get the team involved to cover some of the ground, right? But that extra number, that extra gap, I never even considered that before. But that must be huge. If you've got a company with 100 sales reps, 1,000 sales reps, and you've got the turnover rate at 34%, as it says in the top of this article, that could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions a year in lost revenue just from the time it takes for someone to leave to someone to get hired.
Yeah. So let me circle back to Gong. I'm going to tie Gong back into this, because one of the things that I think Gong does is that we've been talking about that the data is now an asset for a company, right? These conversations are becoming assets. And I think that's part of Gong's evaluation, that they have all these conversations with, we talked about this last week, I think, about they have all these conversations with all these different people in different organizations. So that's valuable intel. But when a salesperson leaves, they typically, if they don't have Gong, Chorus, or anything similar to a conversational platform, that information goes with them. And there are the lost opportunities there. So I totally agree with that. It's a fascinating concept. By the way, not only the lost opportunity, that you look at, you lost the data, you lost the opportunity, but then sometimes how in your business, in the medical industry you were in, if you lose a deal, sometimes it doesn't come back for another 2 years.
Yep.
And that's a bigger impact.
And look, I went from, there's two players in the endoscopy market. Unfortunately, I'm at home for everyone listening on the audio, so I can't pull out an endoscope this week, Victor.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well,
there's no endoscopes at home. They're only in the office.
I appreciate it. The audience appreciates it. We all appreciate it.
I went from the market leader to the other market leader, and I took a whole bunch of customers over with me, and I moved from one end of the country to the other end of the country. So you're not just losing buyers from time. If salespeople are doing their jobs right, they're building a personal brand, if they become an expert in their space, which we bang on about all the time in both our trainings, both in This Week in Sales, on our YouTube platforms, and in our paid training as well, right? If you're doing all that stuff, the managers, the organizations, they're losing a lot more than just kind of time not in the field. They're losing all that as well. So yeah, anything where they can build assets, build IP out of, well, here's a good question, if I do say so myself. What is the ethics of recording a call, or recording 5 years of calls from someone, and then reusing that in the future within your organization? Does the organization that you're selling for own every piece of IP content, everything that you do when you're working in those hours? Or is there a bit of a gray area between what they own and what is you?
I don't think there's a gray area. I think if you work for a company and you use their tools and their platforms, it's their content, it's their IP, I think. I think it's pretty cut and dry. So, I mean, at what time, I mean, what would be the counter argument to that? How would I argue that it is mine?
So let's put a pin in that for a second, but let's project 2 or 3 years into the future where we can now replicate people's voices. Perhaps we've got Google Duplex on the scene, booking meetings. What's to stop then if that company owns that data, that IP, those conversations, everything that you were doing whilst you were working for that organization between 9 to 5 or whatever your work hours are? What's to stop them then going, okay, well, now I'm going to just replicate Will. He's left the company. I'm going to replicate him in Google Duplex form. He's going to be the SDR and represent the company. Because I own all the data. I own the content. Do I own his voice as well?
That is quite an interesting question. It's a great question, Will, because we talked. I think you had an article last week on an avatar for a salesperson, right? So fast forward 5-10 years from now, you can replicate a Will, the voice, the intonation based on the IP that you have. And it's almost like, it's like if I were to replicate, let's say, Michael Jackson and, in a video or just, an animation and put him on my website, I don't think I can do that.
Nope.
So can they do that can they use your avatar?
Yeah. And look, I'm going from one company to another. I'm going to be competing against myself.
Right.
Figure the confusion in the buyer marketplace. Oh yeah, Will Barron just called me. I was like, I didn't call you. The other Will Barron called me.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. It's like Gemini, man. There's two of them, right? There's two of them. So that is interesting though, right? Because in other words, simplified is that, do they own your persona as well? Would be the question. I think that's really interesting, man.
And let me, we won't go any deeper in this because it's probably a conversation for Culture Corner to go down that route. So we'll do that another time. But there's so many weird ethical implications of storing all of this data. Never mind in the workplace, outside of the workplace, because everything you posted on Facebook, YouTube, you don't own that anymore legally, or gray area wise. Of people can strip it, repurpose it, reuse it. So we're living in some weird times. I think all this is going to come to a head at some point in the future.
I think so. Now, you had a question here.
Oh, so thank you, Victor. Pulling us back on track. So this article, even though we've not talked about it at all, was based around using sales assessments to reduce turnover, to help sales managers pick and choose better candidates who are more likely to be in a job for a longer period of time or more likely to be more successful in a sales role. Victor, what's your thoughts on sales candidate assessments, the effectiveness of them? And is that a tool that we should all be using, or all sales hiring managers should be using?
This is interesting. The irony is embedded in here is that we use sales techniques to qualify people to see if they're the right customer. So basically, we're saying the same thing here. We're trying to qualify salespeople to see if they belong in our company. And like anything else, yes, the answer is I do believe in sales assessment, but I think there should be an iterative process where, then we track them for the next 6 months and we figure out, where they're at. I don't know if I told you a while ago, I mentioned that I interviewed, I can't remember the company's name. I think it was People.ai, where they were able to tell within 19 days, based on their behaviors, the salesperson's behavior, whether they were going to make it or not. And so if we can kind of feed back some of that data, once we hire them, feed that back into the assessment, and it does become something static, then I would agree that sales assessments are valuable.
Sure. This is where it all gets a little bit squirrely when you go just for data, because it's very difficult to predict that you've just had a loved one passed away. You have just come back from being really ill with COVID, whatever it is. The 19-day period, it can be massively skewed by human. You talked about this on a show in the past. Things that are predictably unpredictable. I think that's the right terminology of. We all, the next 10 years, all of us are going to have a cold and have a few off weeks, right? It's unpredictable when it's going to happen, but it's predictable that it will happen at some point. So that's my only query with assessments and things of that nature. Coming from an organization, Salesman.org, that has an assessment, right? We know that if you do the assessment 3 days in a row, you're going to get slightly different results, because one day you're tired, one day your cat's just got run over, the other day you're feeling great. So you got to put, you've got to be slightly skeptical about some of these assessment results, I feel.
I agree. But by the way, I've taken assessments and I failed and people still hired me and I was successful.
Sure.
And it's only later I found out you really screwed up your assessment, didn't you? I was like, I hate assessments. I personally hate them. I think what's interesting is that what we're seeing, Will, is that especially in this market, we're seeing a lot of turnover, which you already mentioned, right? The cost of training continues to go up, especially as they're building out all these different technology stacks, right? Because that's just more training on top of that. So I think, qualifying the front end, so to speak, on the hiring side is going to become more and more important over time. And then the retention piece, how do you keep them in? And that's a big conversation right there. How do you retain them once they're in? I think this is the new advantages companies are going to look for, is how do we hire the best? But more importantly, how do we keep them? On that note, Corporate Vision launches a new sales engagement service solution for expanding inside selling teams. So Corporate Vision adds implementation services and expands content offering to include creating and certifying custom cadences and sales plays to ensure impact of technology investments. This, I think, is really interesting from our folks over at Corporate Visions, because basically what they're saying is, look, you guys are buying a lot of stuff, or as you would say, a lot of shite, and maybe you're not implementing correctly. And then again, I like what Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer, Corporate Visions, big shout out to Tim. I quote him, buy the technology will help you automate more consistent and persistent touches with prospects and customers, but technology alone won't give you the right messaging, content assets, or essential skills training to make your investment successful. I think he nailed it on that one, man.
For sure. I just feel, I've got no data on this. It's a gut feeling. I feel like the market has been flooded with hype, with technology. Because I love technology, right? I love fooling around with computers, Macs, building stuff, stripping it down, the studio stuff. I love messing around with technology. But at a certain point, the difficult bit is getting humans trained. The difficult bit isn't the technology anymore. Technology can be replicated. It can be, the price can be sunk down very quickly when you've got 2 or 3 competitors going at it, because you can just copy products. Software is not difficult to build anymore like it was 20 years ago. It's not difficult to host it. The issue is the person using it. There's probably some metaphor there of, pay peanuts, get monkeys, that kind of thing, right? You can spend all your money on sales technology. If you don't hire, if you don't promote, if you don't train, if you don't pay well the salespeople, it's all going to go to, as you lovely put it, it's all going to go to shite.
Yeah. And by the way, it all keeps coming back to, you're highlighting an important, simple point here. It keeps coming back to getting them to use it. Because you, as you said, I think it's cool that you highlighted this, is that the technology is getting simpler to use. The graphic user interfaces are getting simpler to use. So the tools, I mean, they're reducing the amount of friction it takes to actually learn the product. But again, that will of wanting to use it is still there, which gets back to the operating system of the soft skills and people knowing that. So
this,
anyway,
this is something that we can perhaps do between us, Victor. I will make a note of this. We can do it in the not too distant future. We should poll our audiences on what they have in their sales stack, technology they have, and then the technology that they use, and then how frequently they use it. Because no big tech vendor's ever going to do this, because it's going to show that 30% of the customers buying the product are not using it or leveraging it either frequently or appropriately or effectively. Whereas we could do this from a perspective of we're not going to be biased in our results, right? So that would be an interesting mini study to do. Corporate Visions could do this as well.
By the way, we should ask people, go to thisweekinsales.com and just list your technology stack, and then put a percentage on how much you use each of those pieces on a daily basis or a weekly basis. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, that'd be interesting data to see, because we're banging on about all these technology companies, the funding, and this is all the exciting stuff. We're adding to the hype machine here, and it could be that, well, no one really cares. The like me, I won't add you to this group here, Victor, but you're probably part of it. This like knuckle dragging, ape-like salesperson which is me, how I describe myself, right? I've got a quota. If I don't hit our quota for salesman.org, nobody gets fed. I'm the only person selling in the organization, right? So I'm part of this knuckle dragging group. I don't want to use all this technology. I don't want to faff around with stuff. I want to get people on the phone. I want to generate inbound leads. I want to get people on the phone. I want to have a great conversation with them. I want to be positioned as an expert in the space. I want to close them. I want to onboard them. I don't need all that much technology. Someone using Gong to help me. My closing rates are pretty good. I don't know if it would be worth the time, energy, resources. I'm happy to be proven wrong. But at some point, you just need to do the actual job.
By the way, the fact that you're a self-admitted Luddite is interesting, right? Just want to reject technology, which brings me to the next point in our story here, that maybe that's why the next article is about the end of the traveling salesman. COVID's permanent transformation of the sales industry by Kristen Herseth. According to a recent Forrester report, I quote, the events of 2020 have cemented the digitization of B2B buying and selling process. In short, many sales professionals around the world may be permanently grounded, Will Barron. According to a survey of over 750 plus sales professionals during Q1 of 2020, here's some stats. Less than 6% of those surveys were taking in-person meetings at the time of the survey, and over 60% of the respondents indicated that they would not resume in-person meetings until the fourth quarter of this year, or 2022. Let me just stop on that stat. What do you think, my knuckle-dragging friend?
I think this could flip around very quick. So we've just gone in England. I think it's England, Wales, and maybe Ireland, but not Scotland. Have just had what we've called Freedom Day. Just happened this Monday. Basically, nothing's changed. You just don't have to self-isolate. I know you still have to self-isolate.
I like when they make shit up like that.
Yeah.
Freedom Day. What does it mean? I don't know.
So I love Boris. Boris is a knuckle dragger like a lot of us. In fact, no, he's not. Boris is a highly educated, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, highly educated, very intelligent person. He puts on this appearance of being a blundering, knuckle-dragging fool. But that's something he's putting on. But Boris, I'll sidetrack this point because I'm conscious of time. But we've just had this Freedom Day. We've just opened up. I think within a month or two from now, depending on, this is a conversation for another time for you and I, Victor, depending on whether they roll out this COVID passport that they're trying to push for events, you've got to be able to show that you've had the vaccine, all this kind of stuff. There's weird moral implications that we can talk about another time on all of that. But with that said, if all that falls apart, which it probably will do, because nobody's doing track and trace in the UK, it's all just gone to the wayside. If all that falls apart, if people stop wearing masks, if life goes back to normal the best it can, people are going to start traveling because you're going to be doing a deal. I'm going to be trying to do a deal. And if I fly out to meet the buyer, and I've got more chance of getting the deal done, and it's a $2,000 flight, it's a $5 million deal, you're going to do it, aren't you? At some point, the market economics pushes that way.
Yeah, we're seeing it here in the US. I mean, we're a little ahead of you right now, and we're seeing it already. People want the in-person meetings. They're wanting that. It's like there's this hunger for it again. I wanted to ask you about this stat. I thought it was interesting. The challenge, and this is why I truly agree with what you're saying, is 42% of survey respondents indicated that customer churn from organizations impacted by COVID was the biggest challenge facing their revenue team. And I understood that as saying, hey, not only within our organizations do we have churn, but even our customers are also churning as well. So there's a lot of opportunities. In other words, it's like the globe when you mix it up and the little snow starts floating. I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
I'm praying it's like that now, Victor. We're just about to launch an ad campaign that pushes from an ad to a training video from myself, which then gives you an offer, a discount on our training product, right? I'm praying that the market is just so messed up, so scuppered, so backwards and on its head that there's tons of opportunity there. I'm hoping that during COVID, a lot of organizations, especially, which is better for us, bigger organizations, went, okay, we don't need sales training right now. That is the least of our worries. Let's get this off the balance sheet. We'll come and revisit it in 12 months from now. I'm hoping that that's happened because that is massive opportunity for anyone who's willing to push forward and do some outbound and do some competitor takeovers within the market. This should be exciting for everyone, right?
I think it is. I think in your advertisement, I think the challenge you're going to face, we talked about it already, is that, again, there's so much noise out there, Will. Like there's so many people offering sales training platforms or different types of platforms. I see it every day. When the market's oversaturated, here's when you can tell when the market's oversaturated. Many people 2 years ago, probably didn't know what a learning management system was. Now everybody knows what an LMS is, right? And then everybody starts building their courses. And then you see what I call the profit pimps. The profit pimps come out, and these are the pimps that actually say, hey, let me show you how you can build a course in 24 hours. And you're like, really? Or how you can, build a massive income by, claiming a domain niche, an expert at, for example, sales training, and build a sales training empire. So you're starting to see the profit pimps come out. And that's when you know that, again, it's oversaturated too many people.
I think all that's going to flip on its head as well of, is it the intelligent investor, like Warren Buffett's like Bible that he does all his investment on, this idea of value investing? Is that correct?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so there's a book called The Intelligent Investor. I highly recommend it. And it's about investing. It's called value investing. It's investing in companies long-term that you believe are good businesses, as opposed to, for example, investing in Zoom during the pandemic, because, video calls are on the rise, and then trying to sell it at the peak and then reset over. This is what Warren Buffett bases the whole of his Berkshire Hathaway investment management company on, of Apple have a great brand. We're going to invest in them for the next 20 years. And now he owns like 20% of Apple. And he only goes after organizations that have value, that give value to a marketplace. I see this shenanigans that we see right now. You and I see it's probably more clear than perhaps some of the audience do, where there's 20,000 sales trainers all of a sudden, where there are millions of podcasts, sales training podcasts out there, sales podcasts. The market always lands on value. Everyone else eventually will die out, and there'll be 3 training companies that during this mix-up will come and bubble to the top because they've offered value, as opposed to fly-by-night people who've done what you've just said, which they've bought a course for $3,000 that teaches them how to become known in your industry and build a product and sell it, and you do the course, it comes out of a crappy product, and it all falls apart. That is the industry right now. That is the sales training market. There's a bunch of large training organizations. Sandler, for example. I love a lot of the Sandler stuff. Corporate Visions, we talk about them regularly on this show. They do great work as well, tons of great research. So there's a few that are at the top and probably will stay at the top. But right now, there's a bubbling up of all these brands, individuals, people. There's a lot of people that have been laid off from their sales jobs, and they go, okay, what else can I do? I'll do some consulting, I'll do some training. All that disappears in the next 5 years. We're going to reset, go back to just the companies that the market values being at the top. And I think it's cyclical, right? But that's going to happen. I can't remember the point I was trying to make there, Victor.
I don't know. That was kind of a long rant on value on Warren Buffett, but your point is well taken in terms of there are a lot of people in the market. Eventually they'll fail. The problem that is that consumers have a hard time curating what's good and what's not good. And then it creates this sour note amongst buyers that, they're like, well, I bought this before and that didn't work. So you know what? I'm not going to invest anymore. And I'm hoping to avoid that mindset. But anyway.
That's where I was going with this. This is exactly the same for the hype in the sales technology market. Eventually, the hype's going to dissipate. These elevations are going to slow down. And eventually, we'll know who is delivering because they'll be the only company surviving. Because right now, I don't know this to be true. Perhaps, we won't say Gong. That's where I was going to go down the route of. But Willbaron.ai, this conversational intelligence tool, it's got a $20 billion valuation. I want to check it out because it's got a $20 billion valuation. There's tons of people on the platform. It looks like it's doing loads of killer stuff. Eventually, all that will wind down because the market turns to value. So that's where I was going with this, because we talk about all this stuff every week. This time next year, in 2 years from now, this show is going to look different because all that won't be in play anymore.
We'll find out. We'll find out who's hype and who was real. We're going to find that out real quick.
Hype or shite. That's what we'll do. That'll be a feature.
I love that. Hype or shite, man. All right, close us out with this last topic here, Will.
We'll close out this last topic because my friend who's coming visiting is ringing the doorbell right now. So we'll wrap up with this one. Victor, question for you. Well, 2 questions. Are you going to watch the Olympics?
Okay, full confession here. Just total full confession here. Yesterday, something came up on my screen that said Olympics in Japan. And I looked at my wife, I go, are the Olympics this year? I mean, I literally said that. I'm so done with TV and news, man. I literally just found out yesterday. And I should have had clues because I've heard little things here and there, but I just never really locked in until I saw this thing. Oh, it was on Netflix when you open it up and it had something about the Olympics. And I'm like, oh, is it this year? And I'm like, yeah. So there's your answer to my question. So, but if I was interested in the Olympics, what would I be interested in? I would probably be interested in the basketball. Obviously, basketball would be mine.
Sure. So I always watch the basketball. I've watched the basketball. I can't remember they called it something. It's like the Dream Team or the All-Star Team. I've watched the basketball of the Olympics ever since all the US NBA players all stayed on an aircraft carrier because they were so concerned about getting mugged, bombed, and otherwise kind of tortured in wherever it was. I can't remember what year it was or the location.
I don't remember that. It wasn't the Dream Team, though. It wasn't the Dream Team with Michael Jordan. It wasn't them. I remember that because I saw the documentary.
Sure. Whatever year it was, they stayed on an aircraft carrier. And I was like, that is insane. Considering the Olympics is supposed to be amateurs, right?
Yeah. And considering that, you know how our gun laws are here, so...
So I'm looking forward to, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the Olympics.
Can I guess? You
can guess, but you've also probably just seen what I've listed in the doc as well, right?
No, I was going to pick the one that I'm picking your primary one.
Okay. Go for it.
I didn't know if they were in order of importance.
No order.
But I'm going to assume that because you're a martial arts fanatic, judo would be your number one.
No, it's definitely street skateboarding.
Really? Okay. Yeah, totally missed that one.
Judo's pretty good. Judo's good, but it can be a bit hit or miss. In judo, you can do a bit of, it can be a bit patty cakey. And then in the third, in the third minute of like
By the way,
the
the
fifth
visual.
fight, someone gets thrown on their head.
The visual of judo patty caking is hilarious to me.
So it's like, so when anyone who's trained judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you'll know this. Once someone gets hold of your collar, like the lapel on the dressing gown that you're wearing,
you're
going knackered.
over.
You need to get rid of it. You need to strip that grip immediately. So what happens is someone grips, strips, and then once you get one good grip, and you can't get rid of it, then the action's on. So it can be a little bit back and forth. Sometimes it can be a bit boring. The women in particular can be great at judo as well. They tend to be more flexible. There's probably more big slams and big throws in the male judo, but in the women, they can be even more technical on occasion because they're just more flexible. Same in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Women can do stuff that men physically can't. The men typically be a big, like,
I didn't know that. Big,
hairy brutes kind of thing, where the women are still strong as shit. But again, that flexibility makes a massive difference. And but yeah, street skateboarding. What I'm interested in, Victor: judo, street skateboarding, trap shooting, BMX park, basketball, and then of course the crown jewels of the Olympics, right? The 100-meter final.
Hey, by the way, should they have like a UFC Olympic sport? Or, mixed martial arts, like mixed martial arts, just in octagon. I think that would be great.
The problem with that is, and this is an ethical debate with the Olympics in general, the Olympic organization is basically just taking advantage of all these amateurs, making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and putting on a show where no one gets paid. And it's like, hey, come do the boxing, come get beat up for 3 fights, 27 fights to get to the Olympics. It's all amateur. You're not going to get paid. Maybe you'll get a sponsorship deal at the back of it and we'll make all the money. So I don't know, when you get into things like MMA, if people are legitimately willing to put their life on the line to fight in the Olympics without getting a massive payday. So you might get crappy people fighting.
But you have a lot of people who are not within the UFC yet, who have not made it to the professional level, who are still amateurs. Might be interesting. I don't know. I think it might be interesting. Like I always thought Muay Thai would be great to have in the Olympics, but that's just me.
Sure. I've got one final question, Victor, to wrap up the show, mate. This is something I've been pondering, and I've been asking many people this question since the Olympics have been on my radar the past few weeks.
Oh crap.
So I want you to make an assumption, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So in the original Greek Olympics, that's basically nothing like the modern Olympics, but let's assume that they're somewhat similar at this moment in time. In the original Greek Olympics, they did most sports naked. What do you think would be the most uncomfortable sport to do naked at the modern Olympics?
Pole vaulting. Pole vaulting.
My one, Victor.
Too much information. Too much visual information.
My one is the male hurdles.
Oh, that was good.
There'll be some weird, like just slapping noises every 15 foot. That's what I thought. Or if you look at the Winter Olympics, imagine doing.
Sick,
I can't remember what it's called.
You're like officially sick, Will.
When they do like this,
sick,
when they do the ski jump, they're just flying through the air. You got your tackle spinning around.
Like, why? Where did that come from? Like, why would you even insert that into this conversation on This Week in Sales? By the way, out of curiosity, go to thisweekinsales.com and answer that question we'll just posed. What would be the most? How'd you phrase it? The most uncomfortable sport to see someone do naked?
Yeah, in the Olympics specifically.
In the Olympics, we want to know.
Well, there we go. We'll wrap up with there before we lose Victor again to another laughing fit. That was Victor Antonio. My name is Will Barron. You can find us both at thisweekinsales.com. And Victor, anything else to wrap up on, or should we leave it there?
That's it. Let's have a great week.
Speak to you next week, guys.